If a man spent his life drinking more than 40,000 bottles of champagne, smoking an estimated 200,000 cigars, and starting many mornings with a glass of whiskey and soda, you might assume he wouldn't live past 60. And yet this man lived to the age of 90. He was none other than Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and one of the leaders who guided the Allied powers through the darkest years of the Second World War. In this episode, we will explore Churchill's life through three things he loved deeply: alcohol, cigars, and food. In the spring of 1874, the British politician Lord Randolph Churchill married Jenny Jerome, the daughter of a wealthy American businessman. 8 months later, in Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire, their first son was born. That child would later become the man who, alongside Franklin D. Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin, formed the famous alliance that fought against Nazi Germany during the Second World War. If one were to judge Winston Churchill's entire life and political career, he would certainly be considered a controversial figure. But if we look only at his leadership during World War II, Churchill clearly stands as an extraordinary wartime leader and diplomat. Under his leadership, the British Empire, long past its imperial peak, managed to resist Nazi Germany and hold its ground during its darkest hour. In the end, Churchill not only helped guide Britain through one of the most dangerous periods in its history, but also successfully positioned the country among the victorious powers shaping the post-war world. It is therefore no surprise that Churchill was later voted the greatest Briton in a national poll. Yet beyond the world of politics and war, Churchill was also a man who truly understood the pleasures of life. Born into an aristocratic family, he appreciated the subtle art of what we might call table diplomacy. He once famously remarked, "My tastes are simple. I am easily satisfied with the best." For a man who adored fine champagne, rich Cuban cigars, and excellent food, this statement was hardly an exaggeration. So today, through the stories of alcohol, cigars, and food, let us take a closer look at how this political giant enjoyed the 90 years of his remarkable life. Churchill's love for alcohol can be traced back as early as 1899. At the time, he was a young war correspondent covering the Second Boer War in South Africa. According to some accounts, Churchill brought with him 36 bottles of wine, 18 bottles of whiskey, and 6 bottles of brandy as part of his supplies. Speaking about alcohol later in life, Churchill once joked, "I have taken more out of alcohol than alcohol has taken out of me." Of course, we may never know exactly what alcohol took from Churchill's body, but we can safely assume it took quite a bit from his wallet. In 1936, the same year King Edward VIII abdicated the throne, Churchill reportedly received a wine bill equivalent to around $75,000 in today's money. Fortunately, the wine merchant supplying him had a long-standing relationship with the Churchill family, so the matter never became a major public embarrassment. As Prime Minister, Churchill often began his day with a very diluted whiskey and soda, usually made with Johnnie Walker Red Label. Despite his reputation as a heavy drinker, Churchill had his own rules. Strong drinks, he believed, were best saved for later in the day. Lunch, however, was when his favorite drink appeared: champagne. Churchill was quite particular about the brands he enjoyed. Among them were Heidsieck, favored by European aristocracy, Moet and Chandon, famously associated with Napoleon, and Pommery, revitalized in the 19th century by Madame Louise Pommery. But the champagne he loved above all others was Pol Roger, produced in the French town of Epernay. Historians estimate that Churchill drank over 40,000 bottles of Pol Roger champagne during his lifetime. After his death in 1965, the Pol Roger House honored him by placing a black mourning border around their bottle labels. Later, in 1984, they introduced a special cuvée named Cuvée Sir Winston Churchill. Churchill typically drank champagne from a wide goblet, rather than a narrow flute. His close friend Odette Pol Roger once described him as the very image of an Edwardian gentleman. Every year on his birthday, among the gifts he appreciated most were caviar from Joseph Stalin and a fresh case of Pol Roger champagne sent by Madame Pol Roger herself. After lunch, Churchill often enjoyed a glass of cognac, which he considered a pleasant signal that the stomach could now begin its work of digestion. He was also a strong believer in the power of an afternoon nap. Churchill would usually rest around 5 p.m., wake around 6:30, take a bath, and prepare for dinner. Dinner began around 8 p.m., and it was usually the most indulgent meal of the day. A famous example occurred in December 1941, shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Churchill crossed the Atlantic, despite the risk of German submarines, in order to meet President Franklin D. Roosevelt in Washington. During his stay at the White House, the two leaders shared 13 dinners in just 2 weeks. Their conversations often lasted late into the night, accompanied by generous amounts of food and drink. White House staff even invented a phrase to describe the exhausting schedule: Winston hours. After these marathon evenings, Roosevelt often needed nearly 10 hours of sleep to recover. Yet it was during these dinners that Churchill and Roosevelt built a deep personal friendship, a bond that would become one of the foundations of the wartime alliance between Britain and the United States. Churchill first encountered Cuban cigars in 1895, when he traveled to Cuba as a young reporter. Somewhere on a Caribbean beach, he developed a lifelong passion for Havana cigars. After returning to London, he immediately placed an order at a cigar shop on St. James's Street called Lewis's. The shop still exists today, although it is now known as James J. Fox. Inside the store, Churchill memorabilia can still be seen, telling the story of the former Prime Minister and his famous cigars. As his political career progressed, Churchill reportedly smoked around 10 cigars a day. Over the course of his life, historians estimate that he smoked nearly 200,000 cigars. One of the most famous images of Churchill comes from 1941, taken by the photographer Yusuf Karsh. Karsh had only 2 minutes to photograph the Prime Minister, but Churchill refused to remove the cigar from his mouth. After repeatedly asking him to do so without success, Karsh finally stepped forward and simply pulled the cigar out of Churchill's mouth and immediately took the photograph. The result was the now legendary portrait of Churchill looking stern and defiant. Another curious story about Churchill and cigars involves a small trick he was said to use during political debates. According to some accounts, Churchill sometimes inserted a thin pin inside his cigar so that the ash would not fall. This allowed an unusually long column of ash to form, drawing the audience's attention. Whether the story is entirely true or not, it perfectly captures the theatrical side of Churchill's personality. There is also a small mystery about how much of each cigar Churchill actually smoked. His valet Norman McGowan claimed that Churchill usually smoked only half a cigar, saving the rest to be recycled into pipe tobacco. However, during a hospital stay in 1943, Churchill reportedly joked to a nurse that he actually disliked cigars and rarely smoked more than a quarter of one. Whether we choose to believe that statement is another matter entirely. Churchill once said that an ideal dinner should combine excellent food with excellent conversation. For him, the dining table was almost an extension of the political arena. Many debates that could not be resolved in formal meetings were often settled over dinner. In his private life, Churchill also enjoyed dining out and spent considerable sums on restaurants. One of his favorite places was the famous Savoy Hotel in London. his connection with the Savoy may have begun in childhood, when he frequently visited the nearby Savoy Theatre. In 1911, Churchill and the politician F.E. Smith founded a dining society known as the Other Club. The club originally had 41 members, who met every 2 weeks at the Savoy Hotel. Many of them later became leading figures in British public life. As for food itself, Churchill enjoyed classic British dishes such as roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, as well as the strongly flavoured Stilton cheese. Among seafood, he particularly liked shellfish, especially oysters. Like many members of the British aristocracy, Churchill also appreciated French cuisine. He was especially fond of clear French soups, particularly beef consommé. According to his secretary, Churchill often worked late into the night. At 2 or 3 in the morning, he would sometimes request a bowl of hot consommé as a midnight snack. For this reason, the kitchen at 10 Downing Street was often prepared to serve him at almost any hour. There is even a charming story about Churchill and soup during a visit to King Frederick of Denmark. After attending a royal ceremony and staying overnight at the palace, Churchill reportedly asked for soup late at night. Unfortunately, the palace kitchen staff had already gone home. In the end, the king himself went to the kitchen and prepared a bowl of hot soup for his distinguished guest. Finally, Churchill once praised an unusual canned product, Heinz Turtle Soup. The story goes that one of his aides discovered it at a grocery shop on Piccadilly and brought it back to Downing Street. At the time, the product was already somewhat rare, and today it survives mainly as a historical curiosity found in museums. Despite being a passionate lover of good food, Churchill himself had almost no cooking skills. He once joked that the only thing he knew how to cook was a boiled egg. His wife, Clementine, teasingly replied, "My dear Winston, I'm afraid you would probably burn the saucepan." If this episode changed how you see the past, hit like and subscribe. Food Tales drops a new story every week, and the next one is already cooking.